The galaxy, vast and endless, had many worlds, some quiet, some thriving, some on the edge of chaos. On one such planet, a small alien civilization had lived for countless generations, building cities that glittered under two suns and exploring technology that many other species could only dream of. Their society was peaceful, intelligent, and proud. They had grown confident in their isolation, believing their world safe behind layers of shields and defense systems. But nothing in their history had prepared them for the threat that now loomed over them like a shadow, ready to consume everything that began subtly. As most disasters do, with reports of strange activity on the borders of their territory, scouts and sensors first detected unusual movements in deep space, small fleets traveling at incredible speeds, their origin unknown. Initially, the alien leaders dismissed it as routine patrols from distant neighbors, nothing to worry about. But as the hours passed, more evidence emerged. Entire outposts were being wiped out without warning, and the attackers' technology was far beyond anything these aliens had seen before. Panic began to simmer quietly among the high councils. Even though no one wanted to admit the terrifying possibility, their civilization could be in imminent danger. In their secure chambers, surrounded by holographic displays and blinking consoles, the alien leaders debated furiously. Some argued that they could negotiate, maybe even offer resources to avoid conflict. Others believed that fighting was inevitable and that every preparation needed to be made immediately. But as they examined the incoming data, it became painfully clear that this was not a normal enemy. The attacking species did not behave like ordinary invaders. They were methodical, ruthless, and completely unfamiliar with negotiation. Reports of entire cities disappearing overnight, civilians vanishing without trace, and the enemy leaving no survivors were enough to convince the council that traditional defense methods would be useless. As tension escalated, the leaders realized they had only one option left. They had to call for help from outside their galaxy. They had heard whispers, legends spoken in hushed tones, of a group of warriors so deadly that no enemy could survive their tactics. Warriors who thrived in the most dangerous environments, worlds so hostile that ordinary species could not last a day. These warriors were known as the Deathworlders. Stories of them were almost mythical. Some considered them exaggerated, tales of monsters who fought only for glory and left destruction in their wake. But the council had no choice. If these legends were even half true, they might be the only hope for survival. With no time to waste, the council prepared a transmission, a desperate SOS sent across the void of space. This was not a simple call for help. It was a carefully coded signal, containing not only a plea for rescue but also detailed intelligence about their attackers. They shared maps, tactical information, and even weaknesses of their own defenses, knowing that only an extremely skilled and adaptable force could act on this information effectively. For hours, they transmitted, sending bursts of signals across different channels, hoping that somewhere in the galaxy, the Deathworlders were listening. Meanwhile, the citizens of the planet, unaware of the council's plans, continued their daily lives. Children played in the streets of gleaming cities, merchants traded exotic goods in busy marketplaces, and scholars continued their research into science and art. But even in this calm, tension had begun to seep through the atmosphere. Sensors in homes detected strange signals, communications networks buzzed with unidentified activity, and many began to fear that the peaceful life they had known was coming to an end. Panic, though still quiet, was growing like a storm cloud on the horizon. The council members worked tirelessly. They knew the risks. Sending an SOS to the Deathworlders was not without danger. These warriors were unpredictable, feared not only by enemies but also by potential allies. They did not answer calls for help lightly. The council debated how to present themselves, what tone to use, and how much of their civilization to reveal. They worried that a poorly worded plea could result in their planet being ignored or worse, becoming a hunting ground for the Deathworlders themselves. Yet desperation left them no choice. They refined the message over and over, ensuring it carried both the urgency and the clarity needed to compel the legendary warriors to respond. Finally, the SOS was ready. It was dispatched into the depths of space, a shining beacon of hope and desperation. It traveled light years in a matter of hours, reaching regions where few dared to venture. The alien leaders held their breath, knowing that survival depended entirely on whether this plea would be answered. Days passed, and anxiety mounted. Every unusual sensor reading or unexpected transmission set the planet on edge. Civilians whispered of myths coming to life, of monsters in the void, and yet the council dared to hope. The Deathworlders were their last chance, and hope, however slim, was all they had. As the SOS signal left their system, the leaders began to receive faint indications of a response. At first it was subtle, a fluctuation in energy readings, a brief transmission that seemed almost like a shadow passing through the void. Then, more clearly, a fleet began to appear on the edge of their sensor range. Ships unlike any the aliens had ever seen moved with incredible speed and precision. They were enormous, bristling with weapons, engines glowing with power, and shields shimmering like liquid metal. It was immediately clear that these were not ordinary reinforcements. They were the Deathworlders. The realization hit the council like a shockwave. They had actually summoned the legendary warriors, and these beings were coming for them. But alongside hope was fear. The Deathworlders were known for their brutal efficiency and indifference to anyone they did not consider an ally. The aliens had hoped for help, but they now faced the terrifying truth. The Deathworlders would arrive, not out of mercy but because they were bound by some code or curiosity, and their methods would be unlike anything the aliens had experienced. The planet's leaders debated whether they should try to communicate further, warn the Deathworlders about their own citizens, or simply trust that survival itself would dictate the actions to come. Meanwhile, the civilians began noticing the change in the skies. Faint shadows of enormous ships appeared at the edges of their atmosphere. Panic began to spread as people looked up in awe and terror. It was one thing to hear stories of the Deathworlders, another entirely to see them approaching in full force. Schools emptied, marketplaces closed, and families huddled together, unsure of what this arrival meant. The air of the planet was charged with tension, as if the very atmosphere itself sensed that history was about to be rewritten back in the council chambers. The leaders coordinated the first steps of preparation. Even with the Deathworlders on their way, they could not remain passive. They fortified key locations, moved civilians to safe zones, and activated defensive protocols. They also documented every aspect of their attackers' behavior, hoping that the Deathworlders' intervention would not only save lives but also provide knowledge for the future. Yet, even with all this preparation, a nagging thought persisted. Could any force, no matter how legendary, truly withstand the unknown power that threatened their planet? As the first of the Deathworlders' ships entered the planet's orbit, the alien leaders could feel both hope and dread intertwining. Their SOS had been answered, but they knew that help often came with consequences they could not predict. This was a moment that would define their civilization for generations. The small alien race, once confident and isolated, was now thrust into a cosmic struggle far beyond anything they had imagined. The arrival of the Deathworlders marked the beginning of a chain of events that would test courage, intelligence, and resilience in ways that no history book could ever fully capture. By the time the Deathworlders fully emerged into view, the aliens understood something crucial. Survival was no longer guaranteed by their own strength or technology. They had called on legends, beings whose reputation alone could turn the tide of war. The galaxy was about to witness a clash between the desperate and the unstoppable, and these aliens, who had lived peacefully for centuries, were now at the center of a story that would be told for ages. The first signs of the Deathworlders' approach were subtle but unmistakable. Long-range sensors picked up unusual energy fluctuations at the edge of the alien system, signals that moved faster than anything the local scientists had ever recorded. At first, the council wondered if it was another false alarm, another shadow or anomaly in deep space. But then, the readings intensified. Massive forms began to take shape on the scans, shapes that dwarfed any known spacecraft in both size and scale. These were no ordinary reinforcements. They were the Deathworlders, arriving with a speed and purpose that made the alien leaders' hearts pound. The fleet emerged from hyperspace in a display that left the aliens both awed and terrified. Giant ships, hundreds of meters long, glided silently but powerfully through the void. Their hulls gleamed with strange alloys that reflected starlight like mirrors. Yet these ships radiated an aura of danger that was palpable even from across space. Weapons arrays lined the surfaces, glowing faintly, ready for instant action. Shields pulsed rhythmically, a silent heartbeat of protection that promised invulnerability. The scale of the fleet was staggering. It was impossible to comprehend the number of ships that had arrived or the destructive potential they carried. For the aliens, it was both a moment of salvation and fear. They had summoned help, but these were beings of legend, warriors whose reputation was forged in the most extreme conditions imaginable. The stories spoke of their brutality, their efficiency, and their ability to survive situations that would annihilate any ordinary force. Even allies often treated them with caution. The alien leaders had hoped for reinforcements to simply repel their attackers, but now they realized that the Deathworlders did not operate like any force they had known. Their methods were unpredictable, and their power was absolute. As the fleet positioned itself around the planet, the aliens could see how carefully the Deathworlders approached. They did not scatter or move recklessly. Every ship aligned with precision, forming a protective barrier around key cities, resource hubs, and civilian zones. Sensors indicated that the Deathworlders had already begun scanning the planet in ways the aliens could barely comprehend. They were mapping potential threats, analyzing the environment, and preparing for every possibility, all without a single communication or request. It was clear that these warriors treated strategy not as a plan but as instinct. The alien population watched in awe and fear as the sky darkened with the looming presence of the fleet. In cities, families gathered at observation platforms and high towers, pointing at the massive ships silhouetted against the twin suns. Children were both terrified and fascinated, imagining the warriors as living legends descending from the stars. Merchants stopped their trades, and scholars paused their studies to witness the unfolding scene. There was a sense of disbelief in the air. Could beings this powerful have truly come in response to their Yet, amidst the fear, there was hope. The arrival of the Deathworlders signaled that survival was now possible, that there was a force capable of defending them against the overwhelming enemy at their borders. The first interactions, however, were not peaceful. The Deathworlders did not broadcast messages, offer greetings, or wait for permission. Instead, they began taking positions, preparing for conflict with a speed and efficiency that stunned the alien military. Entire defense grids and planetary shields were augmented and reinforced by unseen actions. Where the aliens had struggled to coordinate, the Deathworlders operated with flawless precision. Observation drones detected changes in the atmosphere, energy flow adjustments, and structural modifications, all executed in a fraction of the time it would take the alien engineers. It was a demonstration of power and competence that left even the most experienced leaders questioning their own abilities. The alien leaders gathered in emergency councils to interpret what they were seeing. Their initial fear was growing. These were not just allies, they were predators of war, and their methods were likely incomprehensible to ordinary species. Yet, the council also recognized the opportunity. The Deathworlders' presence meant that their attackers would soon face a force unlike any other. The planet's citizens, unprepared for such intervention, could be saved, but only if the aliens learned to cooperate with these merciless warriors quickly. The challenge was immense. How to survive alongside beings whose motivations, codes, and strategies were largely a mystery. Meanwhile, reconnaissance reports revealed the Deathworlders' ability to manipulate the environment to their advantage. Atmospheric conditions, terrain, and even gravitational anomalies were being assessed and adjusted subtly to create optimal conditions for combat and defense. They were not just preparing for a fight, they were shaping the battlefield itself. Entire regions of the planet, previously vulnerable, were now fortified with invisible layers of protection. Alien engineers tried to understand these enhancements, but their technology could barely detect the subtle energies the Deathworlders had deployed. It was an education in advanced warfare, one the aliens could only observe and hope to comprehend. As the hours passed, the alien military forces observed further astonishing details. The Deathworlders did not simply arrive to block the enemy, they began systematic operations to protect civilians. Entire evacuation routes were activated before a single attack had occurred. Civilian zones were reinforced with temporary shields, and evacuation pods were deployed to nearby safe zones. Hospitals, research facilities, and cultural centers were prioritized. It was as if the Deathworlders had an instinctual understanding of what needed to be preserved, not just for survival, but for the continuation of civilization. The aliens could hardly believe the speed and thoroughness with which these legendary warriors operated. Despite their effectiveness, the Deathworlders remained enigmatic. They did not communicate in ways the aliens could understand. No messages, no warnings, no explanations, only precise, deliberate action. The aliens had no choice but to observe and follow, hoping they could align themselves with these powerful allies without interfering. It was both terrifying and mesmerizing. The presence of the Deathworlders altered every perception of what was possible in warfare. The small alien race, accustomed to thinking in terms of their limited technology and resources, who was now confronted with beings who seemed almost superhuman, operating on a scale and level of intelligence that was difficult to comprehend. As the first signs of potential conflict approached the movements of the invaders, at the outskirts of the system, the aliens realized the magnitude of what had happened. Their call for help had been answered not just by reinforcements, but by beings whose arrival changed the rules entirely. The Deathworlders were not simply defenders. They were a force of nature, an unstoppable presence that demanded respect and awe. The aliens watched as the fleet adjusted positions, sending out detection pulses, aligning weapons, and preparing for action in ways that suggested that no enemy would survive even a single engagement. Fear mingled with hope, the kind of fear that comes when one realizes the scale of true power, and the hope that survival is now within reach. Civilians and soldiers alike began to adapt. The alien population, initially paralyzed by the sheer presence of the Deathworlders, started to follow instructions, evacuate zones, and trust in the warriors' decisions. This was not easy. Fear and uncertainty ran high, and many struggled to understand the speed and logic of the Deathworlders' actions. Yet, as minutes turned into hours, a rhythm emerged. The aliens began to see the advantage of having such an unpredictable and powerful force on their side. The invaders, they realized, were about to face an enemy unlike anything they had prepared for. The odds, once almost hopeless, now tilted in favor of survival. In the council chambers, leaders debated strategy in the shadow of the Deathworlders' fleet. Every plan was reconsidered, every assumption questioned. The presence of these warriors meant that the aliens could not rely solely on their own capabilities. They had to adapt, learn, and coordinate with a force whose methods were foreign and often frightening. This was a lesson in humility. The Deathworlders operated with a kind of brutal clarity, eliminating inefficiency and weakness without hesitation. Observation was the only tool the aliens had, and yet it was also a profound opportunity. By watching, they could learn how to think on a level far beyond their previous understanding of warfare and survival. Finally, as the day progressed, the Deathworlders' intent became clear. They were here not just to protect but to dominate the battlefield in a way that ensured complete victory. Their tactics, subtle yet overwhelmingly effective, were designed to neutralize threats before they could even manifest fully. The alien leaders, once panicked and desperate, began to feel a cautious optimism. The SOS had been answered in a way they could hardly have imagined. Survival was no longer a hope, it was becoming a possibility. The Deathworlders had arrived, and with them, a force capable of turning the tide of war entirely. The galaxy was much larger and more dangerous than they had ever realized. And legends like the Deathworlders were not just stories, they were real, unstoppable forces. Their civilization had been fragile and unprepared, but the intervention of these legendary warriors promised a chance to not only survive but also to witness firsthand the might and precision of beings who operated on a scale beyond imagination. In a single day, hope had returned, tempered with awe, fear, and a deep respect for the visitors who now dominated their skies. The alien invaders, confident in their numbers and advanced technology, believed that their victory was inevitable. They had scouted the planet, studied its defenses, and calculated that the small civilization would be overwhelmed in a matter of days. Their fleets moved aggressively through space, energy weapons charged, fighters ready for deployment. From the moment the first alien vessels appeared near the planet's orbit, they assumed that the arrival of any reinforcement, even the mysterious Deathworlders, would be a minor obstacle easily overcome. They had underestimated both the speed and the scale of what was coming. As the invaders approached, the Deathworlders remained calm and deliberate. Unlike ordinary forces, they did not rush to attack or waste energy on minor threats. Every movement was calculated with precision. Sensors tracked the enemy's positions, weapon ranges, and patterns. The Deathworlders' ships adjusted angles, rotated shields, and deployed invisible countermeasures that neutralized initial strikes before they could even reach the planet's orbit. The alien invaders, expecting minimal resistance, were stunned the first time their attacks failed completely. Beams of energy that should have pierced the Deathworlders' shields dissipated harmlessly, scattering into space. Even the most confident invaders paused, their tactical calculations proving useless against this strange and powerful enemy. From the surface of the planet, the alien population watched the unfolding events in a mix of awe and terror. Observatories, scanners, and personal viewing devices captured the spectacle. The invaders, once feared for their ruthlessness, were being dismantled before landing a single blow. The Deathworlders moved like shadows in space, striking with speed and precision, avoiding all direct confrontation unless necessary, and neutralizing threats with surgical efficiency. It was not chaos. It was strategy in motion. Every move was purposeful, every strike calculated to achieve maximum effect with minimal risk. The aliens on the planet could hardly believe what they were seeing. The beings they had summoned had not just arrived, they were rewriting the rules of engagement entirely. The invaders, initially unaware of the Deathworlders' true capabilities, launched waves of fighters toward the planet's atmosphere, expecting the planetary defenses to falter. Entire squadrons entered orbit, their weapons primed, ready to unleash destruction. But the Deathworlders anticipated every maneuver. Invisible energy fields disrupted targeting systems, and countermeasures redirected incoming projectiles away from vital areas. Fighter after fighter was eliminated almost before it could react, vaporized in streaks of light that left no trace. The invaders, confident in their supremacy, began to experience the first real signs of panic. Their technological advantage, previously unmatched, was being rendered irrelevant by beings they could neither understand nor predict. The alien council watched in a mixture of fear and fascination. They realized that the Deathworlders did not merely fight, they dominated. Their approach to combat was both brutal and precise, focusing on efficiency over spectacle. They did not engage recklessly, nor did they allow emotion to influence strategy. Every move was deliberate, every strike designed to dismantle the enemy's advantage. It was as if the Deathworlders could anticipate the future, predicting the enemy's actions before they happened. This level of skill and foresight was incomprehensible to the aliens, yet it offered a glimmer of hope that survival was possible. On the ground, civilians experienced the tension firsthand. Cities that had once seemed vulnerable now appeared almost untouchable. Energy shields, reinforced by the Deathworlders' fleet, shimmered faintly around major population centers, invisible to the naked eye but impenetrable to enemy attacks. Evacuation routes, previously narrow and slow, were expanded and protected by advanced technologies that the aliens could barely comprehend. Families moved cautiously but efficiently, guided by the subtle influence of the Deathworlders' strategies. Children clung to parents in fear, yet their eyes widened in wonder as they watched the sky light up with the sudden, precise destruction of enemy ships. What had once seemed like certain doom now felt like a carefully orchestrated survival plan unfolding above them. The alien invaders, desperate to regain control, tried to adapt. They attempted flanking maneuvers, using speed and numbers to overwhelm the Deathworlders' positions. But each effort failed spectacularly. The Deathworlders anticipated every strategy, countering with maneuvers so complex that the invaders' own leaders began to doubt their calculations. Entire fleets were trapped in patterns that rendered their weapons ineffective. Fighters collided, misfired, or were destroyed by unseen forces. The invaders' confidence began to crumble, replaced by confusion and fear. They had faced powerful opponents before, but nothing prepared them for the combination of speed, precision, and tactical genius displayed by the Deathworlders. The Alien Council seized the opportunity to study the Deathworlders' methods, observing how the warriors controlled the battlefield. The leaders began to understand the importance of coordination, foresight, and strategic patience. They realized that survival depended not on brute force alone, but on anticipating the enemy, protecting civilians, and using intelligence effectively. Slowly, the aliens began to adapt their own defenses, guided indirectly by the Deathworlders' actions. It was a crash course in warfare, one taught by legends, and the students were both terrified and inspired by their teachers. That as the battle continued, the scale of destruction inflicted on the invaders became apparent. Entire ships, designed to carry hundreds of enemy soldiers and advanced weaponry, were obliterated in seconds. Strike teams attempting to deploy onto the planet were neutralized before they could land. The invaders' leaders, who had expected an easy conquest, now faced the terrifying realization that their forces were being outclassed at every turn. Panic spread among their ranks as confusion mounted. They had underestimated a death, and now they faced a relentless enemy capable of predicting and countering every move, from orbit to the planetary surface. The Deathworlders' control was absolute. They used the environment as a weapon, turning natural hazards into defensive tools. Asteroid fields were redirected, magnetic storms manipulated, and planetary terrain leveraged to create advantages for their positions. The aliens on the planet, observing these tactics, could only gape in astonishment. They had sent a plea for help and were now witnessing a level of strategy and power that defied their imagination. Survival was no longer merely about defense, it was about being part of a battle choreographed by forces they barely understood. Despite their fearsome reputation, the Deathworlders were not mindless destroyers. They avoided unnecessary civilian casualties, focusing instead on neutralizing the invaders' capabilities efficiently. This precision created a sense of awe among the aliens. They realized that these warriors were more than rescuers, they were masters of strategy and discipline, capable of turning impossible situations into manageable victories. Observing the Deathworlders in action became both a lesson and a reassurance. The enemy might have been overwhelming, but now, with the Deathworlders' intervention, hope was tangible. The alien invaders, now desperate, attempted one final coordinated assault. Fleets converged on key planetary locations, their weapons blazing and energy shields fully activated. Yet, the Deathworlders anticipated even this move. Their counterattack was swift, devastating, and flawless. Enemy ships were destroyed in patterns that maximized efficiency and minimized wasted energy. Communication lines within the invading forces collapsed as leaders struggled to comprehend the speed and effectiveness of the response. What had been expected to be a decisive strike turned into a catastrophic failure, leaving the invaders' forces scattered and demoralized on the planet. The alien population began to realize the enormity of what was happening. Their civilization, which had seemed small and vulnerable, was being protected by beings of almost unimaginable power. Streets that had been tense with fear now buzzed with cautious hope. Citizens moved under guidance, assisted by emergency systems implemented by the Deathworlders, and began to witness firsthand the difference between ordinary defense and the intervention of legends. They saw a new kind of order, one where intelligence, strategy, and precision mattered more than sheer numbers. The Alien Council, watching the invaders collapse, understood a profound truth. The Deathworlders were not just powerful, they were unstoppable in ways that defied conventional thinking. Their arrival had shifted the balance entirely. The invaders' confidence, based on overwhelming numbers and advanced technology, had been shattered in hours. The aliens, who had feared annihilation, now realized that they might survive, not because of their own strength, but because they had been smart enough to call upon forces far beyond their comprehension. As the invaders retreated, the alien leaders reflected on the lessons of the battle so far. The Deathworlders' methods were brutal, yet precise, efficient, yet humane, and always dominant. They had transformed the battlefield, controlled the enemy's movements, and ensured civilian safety with a combination of foresight and raw power that no ordinary force could match. Observing them, the aliens began to understand that survival in the galaxy required more than technology or bravery. It required strategy, adaptability, and the wisdom to seek help from those far greater than oneself. Their invaders, once confident in victory, were now scattered, demoralized, and incapable of mounting an effective assault. The Deathworlders had demonstrated the full extent of their skill, leaving no doubt that any attempt to challenge them would result in complete annihilation. The alien population, previously paralyzed by fear, now experienced a sense of cautious optimism. They had called for help, and their call had been answered with power, precision, and the intervention of legends. The Deathworlders had arrived, not to negotiate, not to provide ordinary assistance, but to dominate, protect, and ensure that the enemy would not succeed. The civilization that had once faced near certain doom now witnessed the transformative impact of legends in action. Their SOS had been answered in a way that no one could have imagined, and they were forever changed by the power, strategy, and presence of the Deathworlders. The alien civilization, once confident in their ability to defend themselves, had now fully realized the true power of the Deathworlders. The initial shock of the fleet's arrival had given way to a mix of awe and cautious optimism. The alien leaders and citizens alike watched as these legendary warriors took control of the planet's defense with an almost instinctual precision. The Deathworlders did not simply fight, they transformed the entire planet into a fortress, reinforcing weak points, redirecting resources, and preparing civilians for a conflict that was already underway in the skies above. From orbit, the Death ships moved like living entities, coordinating with one another flawlessly. They positioned themselves to shield vital population centers, research facilities, and power grids. At the same time, they scanned the enemy forces, anticipating attacks before the invaders even formulated them. Every move the alien invaders made was met with a counter, not reactive but proactive. As if the Deathworlders could see several steps ahead in a game of cosmic chess, the Alien Council watched in astonishment as the legends they had summoned reshaped the entire battlefield without a single word, showing that true mastery was in action rather than speech. On the surface, the effect was just as profound. Streets, plazas, and residential areas that had been vulnerable to bombardment were suddenly fortified by invisible shields and barriers that pulsed faintly with energy. Evacuation routes were expanded and reinforced with technology the aliens could barely comprehend. Hospitals, schools, and essential facilities were protected, ensuring civilian survival even in the event of direct attacks. The Deathworlders did not wait for the enemy to strike. They preemptively eliminated dangers and prepared the planet to withstand assaults the aliens had never imagined. Civilians, initially paralyzed by fear, began to follow the guidance imposed by the Deathworlders' interventions. Emergency systems activated automatically, directing people to safe zones and ensuring that the most vulnerable were prioritized. Families moved in organized groups, guided by subtle signals that seemed to anticipate their needs. Children clutched parents' hands, wide-eyed and anxious, as they watched the alien invaders' fleets approach, only to be repelled or destroyed before landing a single strike. The Deathworlders' methods were terrifyingly efficient, yet strangely reassuring, as if the planet itself had been transformed into a living defensive organism. The alien military, which had once struggled to coordinate even basic maneuvers, now operated under the indirect guidance of the Death. Tactical commands, energy allocations, and defensive positioning were adjusted automatically, and the aliens soon learned that their previous strategies, based on conventional logic, were ineffective against either the invaders or the Deathworlders' approach. The lessons were harsh but invaluable. Survival depended not on raw power or technology alone, but on understanding patterns, anticipating threats, and adapting instantly to changing circumstances. The Deathworlders taught, without speaking, through demonstration. As the enemy attempted to launch assaults on the planet, they were met with a level of resistance that was both overwhelming and disorienting. Entire fleets of attackers were neutralized before reaching the surface. Bombardments that should have devastated cities were redirected harmlessly or absorbed by shields. Fighters attempting to infiltrate critical areas were intercepted by the Deathworlders' tactical drones, eliminated silently and efficiently. The invaders, confident in their superiority, began to experience the first waves of panic and confusion. Their advanced technology was being rendered useless by a force that seemed to anticipate every move, strike, and misstep. The Alien Council took careful note of the Deathworlders' strategies. They began to see patterns in how these warriors controlled the battlefield, from the deployment of energy shields to the manipulation of orbital defenses. They observed how civilian areas were prioritized, how evacuation procedures were flawlessly executed, and how resources were reallocated in real time to respond to threats. It was an education in survival and warfare unlike anything the aliens had encountered. For the first time, they understood that intelligence, foresight, and adaptability could be as lethal as any weapon. The Deathworlders' impact extended beyond immediate combat. They reshaped the planet's logistics, ensuring that supply lines, energy networks, and communication systems remained intact despite enemy interference. They anticipated potential points of failure and reinforced them before they could be exploited. Where the aliens had once feared complete destruction, the Deathworlders created an environment where survival was structured, methodical, and almost guaranteed, as long as the civilians and military followed the indirect guidance provided. The alien leaders were forced to reconsider every assumption they had about defense and strategy, realizing that their past methods were primitive compared to the Deathworlders' holistic approach. Civilians, initially in shock at the sheer presence of these warriors, began to feel a sense of hope. Streets that had been deserted in fear were now occupied by orderly evacuations, medical teams, and support crews moving with a precision that mirrored the Deathworlders' own efficiency. Citizens witnessed the invaders' failures firsthand, seeing their enemies destroyed without a single civilian casualty in many areas. The scale of the Deathworlders' intervention was unlike anything they had ever experienced. It was as if the planet itself had become a living fortress, guided by beings who understood both war and survival instinctively. Despite their calm and methodical approach, the Deathworlders did not allow any sign of complacency. They constantly assessed threats, adjusted positions, and implemented new strategies. The alien invaders, frustrated and increasingly desperate, attempted to regroup and counterattack, but each effort was anticipated and neutralized. The Death mastery of the battlefield was total. They did not simply react, they dominated. Even the alien leaders, who had initially summoned these warriors with hope, began to realize the scale of power they had called upon. These were not ordinary reinforcements, they were a force capable of reshaping the very meaning of conflict. The aliens began to see the true genius of the Deathworlders. Unlike ordinary defenders who might protect specific locations or repel attacks reactively, the Deathworlders orchestrated an entire planet's defense as a single, cohesive system. From orbital shields to city evacuations, from energy management to frontline combat, every action was synchronized and optimized. They minimized risk, maximized efficiency, and ensured that every civilian, resource, and strategic asset had the highest chance of survival. The aliens had never encountered this level of integrated planning and execution. It was both terrifying and inspiring, a combination that left no one indifferent. The alien invaders, by contrast, began to unravel. Their initial arrogance had been replaced by frustration and fear. Fleets that had once seemed unstoppable were now trapped, destroyed, or scattered. Strike teams that had expected minimal resistance were annihilated. Commanders struggled to adapt to a force that seemed to predict every move. Communication failures, logistical breakdowns, and confusion swept through their ranks. They had expected an easy conquest, but now faced an enemy so precise, so adaptable, that defeat seemed inevitable. Back on the planet, the civilians witnessed moments of both terror and relief. Alien families, once paralyzed by fear, now moved with a sense of purpose. Evacuation routes were clear, shelters were stocked, and medical facilities were operational, all thanks to the unseen guidance of the Deathworlders. Children, watching from safe vantage points, marveled at the efficiency and power displayed above them. Merchants, scholars, and workers realized that their survival depended not on panic, but on following the structure and safety measures created by the legendary warriors. Even as the alien invaders continued their desperate assaults, the population began to feel that survival was not only possible, it was being ensured by forces beyond comprehension. The Alien Council, reflecting on the ongoing events, began to grasp the depth of the Deathworlders' methods. These warriors did not merely protect, they redefined the rules of engagement. They had converted the planet into a living defensive organism, combining technology, strategy, and foresight to achieve total dominance over the battlefield. Every move was designed not only to eliminate threats but also to preserve life and civilization. For the first time in their history, the alien leaders realized that true mastery in war was not about overwhelming force alone, but about intelligence, adaptability, and the capacity to foresee and neutralize threats before they even materialized. The alien civilization had undergone a profound transformation. Their cities, previously vulnerable, were now fortified in ways they had never imagined. Their military forces, once inexperienced and uncoordinated, were beginning to learn from the Deathworlder strategies. Civilians had gained hope and organization. Guided by systems that ensured survival even in the face of overwhelming enemy attacks, the Deathworlders had not only arrived, they had fundamentally changed the way the aliens understood war, defense, and the possibilities of survival. As the alien leaders and citizens watched the skies, they understood a vital truth. The planet was no longer defenseless. The Deathworlders' presence had turned fear into cautious confidence, chaos into structured resistance, and despair into hope. The civilization that had once faced near certain destruction now stood as a testament to the transformative power of intervention by beings whose skill, strategy, and understanding of warfare were beyond imagination. Their SOS had been answered, and in doing so, they had witnessed the rebirth of their survival in real time. The battle for the alien planet had reached a critical stage. The alien invaders, who had once believed victory was inevitable, were now on the verge of total collapse. Their advanced fleets, previously confident and overwhelming, were being dismantled with ruthless efficiency by the Deathworlders. These legendary warriors had transformed the battlefield entirely, turning the tide in ways the aliens themselves could hardly comprehend. The invaders had expected a straightforward conquest, but instead, they faced a force that anticipated their every move, countered every strategy, and left them reeling in confusion and fear. The decisive moment came near the planet's largest city, a sprawling metropolis that had been both a hub of civilization and a symbol of vulnerability. The invaders had focused their efforts here, believing that capturing or destroying this city would break the spirit of the alien population. Entire fleets approached the orbit, energy weapons primed, ground forces ready for deployment. They expected resistance, of course, but nothing like what awaited them. The Deathworlders had anticipated the invaders' focus on the city and had already laid a series of traps and countermeasures designed to neutralize the threat before it could reach the surface. As The first wave of invaders entered orbit. They encountered an invisible but impenetrable barrier that rendered their weapons ineffective. Beam after beam of energy, designed to strike with devastating force, dissipated harmlessly as if it had never existed. Strike fighters attempting to land were intercepted by unseen forces, vaporized before they could even approach the surface. The invaders' commanders, watching from their control stations, realized too late that their plans had been anticipated in every detail. Panic spread quickly as confusion mounted and communications between fleets began to collapse under the strain of unexpected losses. From the planet's surface, civilians could see flashes of destruction in the skies above. Though most were protected from direct harm, the Deathworlders' interventions were precise and selective, eliminating only enemy forces while ensuring that civilian areas remained untouched. Evacuation routes and safe zones, established by the Deathworlders earlier, allowed the population to move freely and avoid the chaos above. Families huddled together, watching in awe as entire squadrons of enemy fighters were obliterated with surgical precision. The city that had once seemed on the brink of devastation now appeared almost untouchable, protected by forces beyond the comprehension of ordinary beings. The alien military, previously overwhelmed and disorganized, began to take cues from the Deathworlders' actions. They observed how the legendary warriors controlled both the skies and the battlefield below, noting the strategic placement of forces, the timing of strikes, and the coordination between orbital and ground-level operations. Slowly, the aliens began to adapt, learning to integrate their own limited capabilities into the broader strategies executed by the Death. While they remained inexperienced, their understanding grew rapidly under the indirect guidance of these masters of war. The invaders, desperate to regain control, launched multiple coordinated assaults on the city. They attempted to overwhelm the defenses with sheer numbers, using advanced technology to bypass barriers and targeting civilian zones to force surrender. Yet, every move was anticipated. The Deathworlders adjusted in real time, redirecting energy flows, manipulating gravity fields, and deploying countermeasures that neutralized entire fleets at once. The invaders' confidence, built on years of technological superiority, crumbled under the relentless precision of their unseen opponents. They were fighting a battle they could neither predict nor control, and with every failed attack their morale sank further. At one point, a massive assault fleet managed to breach the outer defenses of the city, approaching the surface with the intent of landing troops and unleashing devastation. Civilians below panicked, expecting the worst, but the Deathworlders had prepared for this scenario as well. Within moments, orbital energy beams and tactical strikes from hidden positions destroyed the approaching ships, preventing any damage from reaching the planet. The precision and timing of these strikes was so perfect that the aliens began to view the Deathworlders as almost supernatural in their efficiency. Entire enemy formations were wiped out before a single building could be touched, leaving the aliens in disbelief at the scale of their saviors' capabilities. The invaders' leaders, observing their catastrophic losses, attempted to retreat and regroup, but the Deathworlders anticipated even this. They used a combination of rapid strikes, environmental manipulation, and tactical traps to cut off escape routes, isolating pockets of enemy forces and destroying them. No maneuver went uncountered, no strategy went unchallenged. The invaders' technological advantages, which had once seemed insurmountable, were rendered useless by the Deathworlders' ability to predict, counter, and dominate. Each failed attack added to the invaders' panic, and soon, coordinated resistance became impossible. On the planet, the citizens began to understand the true nature of their protectors. The Deathworlders were not merely strong, they were intelligent, adaptable, and ruthless against threats while remaining careful with those they were protecting. Evacuation procedures continued smoothly. Medical teams operated under newly established protocols, and resources were distributed efficiently, ensuring that even in the chaos of battle, survival was achievable. Families, who had once feared annihilation, now moved with purpose and confidence, guided by systems and strategies beyond their understanding. The alien military, observing the repeated failures of the invaders, gained confidence as well. Soldiers who had previously doubted their chances began to see opportunities. They moved in coordination with the Deathworlders' strategists, supporting attacks, securing critical infrastructure, and reinforcing safe zones. Although they still lacked the experience and raw power of the legendary warriors, their effectiveness grew exponentially under observation and guidance. What had begun as a desperate fight for survival now evolved into a coordinated defense, led by the invaders' own learning and adaptation to the Deathworlders' methods. A particularly critical moment occurred when the invaders attempted a massive strike on the city's central command hub, aiming to decapitate leadership and disrupt defensive coordination. The Deathworlders anticipated the attack with uncanny foresight. Orbital strikes, energy redirection, and defensive maneuvers converged on the enemy fleet, eliminating their approach before they could reach the city. The precision of this operation was breathtaking. Enemy vessels were destroyed in perfect sequences, energy beams neutralized without collateral damage, and the city itself remained untouched. The alien leaders, witnessing this, understood the full magnitude of what they had called upon. beings whose mastery of war was beyond imagination, capable of controlling the battlefield with unparalleled skill. With the invaders effectively neutralized, the Deathworlders shifted focus to securing and stabilizing the city. They deployed small tactical units to patrol vulnerable areas, eliminate remaining threats, and reinforce critical infrastructure. Their methods were thorough and meticulous, ensuring that no enemy could regroup or exploit weaknesses. For the first time, the alien population felt a sense of stability in a conflict that had once seemed hopeless. Streets were patrolled, evacuation zones maintained, and medical care ensured, all orchestrated with the same precision that had dismantled the invaders' forces. Survival was no longer a hope, it was a guarantee, contingent only on the continued presence and guidance of the Deathworlders. The alien invaders, now fully demoralized, attempted to retreat from the planet entirely. Their remaining fleets were scattered, command structures broken, and morale shattered. Those who survived the relentless precision of the Deathworlders' counterattacks fled into deep space, leaving behind weapons, technology, and plans for conquest that were utterly defeated. For the aliens on the planet, the sense of relief was profound. The invaders who had once threatened complete annihilation were now a broken and retreating force, powerless against the legends that had arrived to protect them. As the city and planet stabilized, the alien population began to comprehend the scale of what had just occurred. Their civilization, once on the brink of destruction, had been saved not merely by brute strength but by intelligence, strategy, and foresight. The Deathworlders had not only repelled the invaders, they had demonstrated the importance of preparation, adaptability, and calculated action. The aliens realized that survival in the galaxy required more than technology or courage. It required understanding, learning, and sometimes seeking aid from forces far beyond one's own capabilities. In the aftermath, the alien leaders took stock of their civilization's condition. The city, though never fully threatened due to the Deathworlders' protection, had been placed on high alert, and infrastructure was assessed for vulnerabilities. The citizens, initially traumatized by the events, began to rebuild with renewed determination. They had witnessed firsthand the intervention of beings whose power and strategy were unmatched, and they carried forward lessons that would shape their society for generations. Trust, courage, and adaptability had been tested and proven, and the presence of the Deathworlders had left an indelible mark on every individual who had survived. The story of the decisive battle near the largest city became a pivotal moment in the alien civilization's history. The invaders' retreat, coupled with the flawless execution of the Deathworlders' strategies, ensured that the planet was not only defended but also transformed into a model of coordinated survival. Citizens, scholars, and military personnel alike began to document the events meticulously, recording every tactic, observation, and lesson. The Deathworlders had not only saved lives, they had provided a blueprint for defense and survival that would guide the aliens long after the battle had ended. The alien civilization understood a fundamental truth. Survival was no longer a question of hope, it was a matter of applying intelligence, strategy, and coordination. The Deathworlders had shown that even in the face of overwhelming odds, meticulous planning, adaptability, and decisive action could turn near-certain defeat into victory. The planet's defenders and civilians alike emerged from this phase with a new understanding of resilience, courage, and the extraordinary power of legendary intervention. Their SOS had been answered in a way that surpassed expectation, leaving them alive, inspired, and forever changed. The aftermath of the battle brought an eerie calm over the alien planet. The skies, once filled with the blaze of energy weapons and the roar of collapsing fleets, now held only the shimmering forms of the Deathworlders' ships in orbit, silently maintaining watch over the planet. The alien civilization had survived against odds that once seemed insurmountable, and the lessons of survival were now etched into every citizen's mind. Yet, even in victory, the presence of the Deathworlders remained imposing, a reminder that salvation had come not through ordinary means but through the intervention of beings whose power and strategy were legendary. As the dust settled, the alien leaders gathered to assess the damage and plan for the future. The invaders had been decimated, their remaining fleets scattered into deep space, their forces broken, and their plans for conquest destroyed. Cities had survived largely intact, though some outer regions had been temporarily affected by skirmishes. The Deathworlders had ensured that civilian casualties were minimal, their precision striking fear into the enemy while protecting life. Leaders could barely comprehend the level of control and foresight displayed during the battle. They realized that their civilization's survival was not due to their own strength or technology, but to the intervention of warriors who operated on an entirely different scale. Civilians emerged from shelters and observation points with a mixture of relief, awe, and disbelief. Streets, squares, and parks that had once been deserted due to fear now slowly filled with life. Families reunited, children played cautiously, and people whispered stories of the invisible forces that had protected them. The scale and precision of the Deathworlders' actions were unlike anything they had ever witnessed. Entire fleets had been destroyed, yet not a single misstep had resulted in widespread civilian harm. The city's heart, the symbol of the civilization itself, had remained unscathed. People began to understand that their survival was orchestrated with intelligence and ruthlessness combined, a combination beyond ordinary comprehension. The alien military, still in shock from the overwhelming efficiency of the Deathworlders, began to take stock of their own capabilities. They had learned lessons not through trial and error, but by observing beings whose understanding of warfare was instinctive and flawless. Strategies, positioning, and logistics that had once seemed impossible were now clear examples of what could be achieved with foresight and coordination. Officers discussed and documented every action of the Deathworlders, realizing that their intervention had been a crash course in tactics, leadership, and battlefield dominance. In the weeks and months to come, these lessons would shape the alien military in ways previously unimaginable. The surviving alien invaders, now retreating into deep space, were in disarray. Communications between their scattered fleets were erratic, command structures were broken, and morale had collapsed completely. No longer confident in their superiority, they were forced to acknowledge that the Deathworlders had outmatched them in every respect. Entire squadrons had been destroyed, landing parties neutralized, and key technology rendered useless through the precise application of strategy and power. The invaders' arrogance had been shattered, and what remained of their forces were little more than frightened remnants, fleeing from a battle they had expected to win effortlessly. Meanwhile, the Deathworlders did not linger unnecessarily. They maintained a watchful presence in orbit, scanning for any resurgence of enemy activity, but they did not intervene in the daily lives of the planet's inhabitants unless required. Their purpose had been to ensure survival and to eliminate threats decisively, and that objective had been achieved. Their ships, massive and imposing, now hovered like silent guardians. The alien population understood that while the immediate danger had passed, the Deathworlders' presence was a constant reminder of both protection and power. Their legends had come to life, and the reality was far more extraordinary than any tale. The alien leaders convened to discuss reconstruction and long-term defense. They realized that the planet had survived not just through luck, but through the extraordinary foresight and skill of the Death. Entire sectors of the military were restructured based on the observation of how these legendary warriors coordinated resources, deployed forces, and safeguarded civilians. The Council understood that future survival would require more than tech, would demand strategic thinking, rapid adaptability, and an understanding of how to anticipate threats before they materialized. In essence, the civilization had been elevated to a higher standard of resilience and intelligence through the indirect guidance of the Deathworlders. Civilians began the painstaking work of returning to normal life. Markets reopened, schools resumed, and citizens slowly regained confidence in their safety. Yet, the experience had changed them profoundly. Families told stories of the invisible yet precise forces that had protected their streets, of fleets obliterated without warning, and of cities saved against impossible odds. Children grew up hearing tales of the Deathworlders as living legends, beings whose intervention had saved an entire civilization. For many, the concept of survival had shifted. It was no longer just about defending oneself, but about recognizing patterns, understanding strategy, and relying on intelligence as much as courage. The alien scientists and engineers began to study the remnants of the invaders' technology and the subtle changes the Deathworlders had made to the planet's defenses. They were fascinated by the complexity and efficiency of these interventions. Energy flows had been redirected in ways previously thought impossible. Shields had been optimized to a level that alien engineers could barely understand, and logistical networks had been reorganized seamlessly. Though they could not replicate the Deathworlders' abilities, they gained insight into how strategic thinking and precise execution could vastly improve their defenses. For the first time, knowledge and survival were intertwined in a way that promised lasting protection. The alien scholars recorded every observation meticulously, knowing that these lessons would guide future generations. The intervention of the Deathworlders was not just a battle, it was a masterclass in strategy, efficiency, and resilience. Every tactic, every maneuver, and every subtle adjustment to the battlefield became a study in foresight and intelligence. The alien civilization understood that their future survival depended on integrating these lessons into their culture, military, and societal planning. What had been an unprecedented disaster turned into an unparalleled opportunity to grow stronger, smarter, and more prepared for challenges to come. Meanwhile, the Deathworlders maintained vigilance. Though they did not interfere unnecessarily, they understood that their role was not to dominate the civilization indefinitely, but to ensure survival and to neutralize the immediate threat. Their presence in orbit continued as a silent assurance, a reminder that the planet was protected and that any future aggression would be met with overwhelming precision. The alien population, while grateful, also recognized that the Deathworlders operated under their own strict code of efficiency and discipline. They were protectors, yes, but also beings of legend whose decisions were beyond the control of ordinary civilizations. As time passed, the alien society began to rebuild and adapt. Infrastructure was restored, trade routes reopened, and military strategies were reevaluated. The presence of the Deathworlders had instilled a profound sense of discipline and awareness. civilians and soldiers alike learned that survival required intelligence, foresight, and adaptability. The planet's defenses were reorganized based on observations of the legendary warriors' actions. Systems were optimized, emergency protocols refined, and training programs adjusted to incorporate the lessons of precision and strategic thinking demonstrated during the battle. Despite the relative calm, the aliens never forgot the scale of what they had witnessed. The invaders' destruction, achieved with surgical precision by the Deathworlders, served as a constant reminder of the stakes of survival. The citizens, leaders, and scholars understood that the galaxy was vast and dangerous, and that even civilizations that appeared strong could be threatened by overwhelming forces. The Deathworlders' intervention had not only preserved life but had also imparted a vital lesson. Survival depended on more than courage; it required intelligence, adaptability, and the willingness to learn from those far beyond one's own level of capability. The invaders' retreat created a new era of vigilance. Though the immediate threat had passed, the alien civilization understood that the lessons of the Deathworlders were permanent. Their strategies, foresight, and precision became a model for how to prepare for future challenges. Military academies incorporated observations of the Deathworlders into training programs, teaching officers how to anticipate enemy movements, manage resources efficiently, and protect civilian populations with minimal loss. The entire society began to adopt principles of strategic intelligence, resilience, and coordinated action, all inspired by the legendary intervention that had saved them. In the months that followed, the alien planet stabilized completely. The citizens resumed daily life, but their understanding of survival and strategy had been transformed. Children grew up hearing stories of the Deathworlders, of their unmatched precision, their ruthlessness against threats, and their unparalleled intelligence. Scholars and engineers continued to study the subtle technological and strategic interventions, hoping to integrate lessons into their own methods. Even the alien military, once overconfident and now operated with a sense of discipline, coordination, and respect for the principles demonstrated by the legendary warriors. That having ensured the planet's survival and the elimination of the invaders, finally began to withdraw their direct presence, remaining only as distant guardians. Their mission had been fulfilled. The alien civilization, though forever changed by the experience, was stronger, wiser, and more resilient. They had witnessed the intervention of beings whose skill, strategy, and foresight were beyond imagination, and they had survived against odds that once seemed insurmountable. The SOS they had sent across the stars had been answered in a way they could never have expected, leaving them alive, inspired, and forever indebted to the legendary Deathworlders. Their perspective on war, strategy, and survival had shifted entirely. They understood that intelligence, adaptability, and foresight were as important as courage and technology. They had learned that intervention by beings of superior skill could save lives in ways ordinary measures could not. The legacy of the Deathworlders' intervention would endure for generations, shaping the society, military, and culture of the planet in profound and lasting ways. Survival, once uncertain, had become not only possible but sustainable, guided by the lessons of legends whose presence would never be forgotten.